Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us for Iconic Orlando, exploring the stories behind downtown landmarks. I'm Katie Kelly. I'm the Curator of Education here at the History Center, and I'd like to welcome everyone joining us here today, both in person and also live on the webinar. As always, we greatly appreciate you supporting us by attending our programming. And I also want to take a moment to especially thank our sponsor, Ambar, for their generous support of our Lunch and Learn programs. I'll make sure to leave some time at the end for questions, and then anybody who's on the live webinar can go ahead and put those in the chat, and Cheyenne, who's running things on the back end, can relay those to me. So today's talk actually comes out of our monthly contributions to the community paper. So since 2018, our staff have been contributing a monthly column to the community paper. It's that free paper that you might see available everywhere around town, where we discuss the history of fascinating people, places, and events in Orlando history. I was recently going through a backlog of the articles that we have contributed over the years, and I was really struck by some of the fascinating stories that come out of right here downtown. And I was especially interested to hear some of the history and the backstory of some of the places that I either walk or drive by every day just coming into work, including our historic building here, which I'll also talk about today. I also thought that it would be interesting to share some of this at one of our Lunch and Learn programs. And a great opportunity for us to highlight some of the research that our staff have been doing over the years, because we do so many different kinds of research and put information out there in so many different avenues, including the community paper and our biannual, is it biannual or semi-annual when it's twice a year? Our twice a year reflections from Central Florida Magazine that we publish and put out. And so I thought, Lunch and Learn's another opportunity for us to share some of this information and share some of the research that we do, the really quality research that they're doing up in our collections department and our historians are doing, and also in our education department as well. So that's where this sort of comes from. It's also a chance for me to plug the community paper and to tell everyone, when you see it, pick it up. There's some really great stuff in there. I've selected 11 sites for us to talk about today. All of them are located either in downtown or within a mile or two of downtown, so they're all really local. Many of them are within a block or two of this building. I apologize in advance if I'm not covering something that you consider to be an iconic Orlando site. Mostly I'm trying to, based my talk today on research that we have done, and so I'm sort of basing it off of that, and then sites that have a really particularly interesting backstory. So we may associate Orlando with one of the skyscrapers that is the most prominent in the skyline. However, if it doesn't have a super interesting historical backstory, I didn't include it in today's talk. Definitely, if you know of a site or think of something that has a really interesting story behind it, or that you would like to know the story behind, feel free to share that kind of information in the evaluation that we send out at the end of every program. We're always looking for more ideas for content, things that we can offer to the public, and do things that you guys want to see. All right, so we will start by looking at some of the architecture that stands out downtown, either because of its age or visibility, or the historical significance behind it. Then we'll talk about a few things that may not be architecture, but that are certainly eminently recognizable to anybody familiar with downtown. And then I will end the program today by highlighting a few things that maybe you haven't noticed, but that have a really interesting history behind them. So it'll sort of give us something to sort of keep a lookout for. So maybe not everything in this talk will definitely rise to the level of iconic, but certainly interesting and worth noticing. Since we'll be talking about downtown and some of the sites we know so well in our city today, I thought that it would be interesting to start with a little overview of the early history of downtown to envision just how much the area has changed. Then we will work our way through time, discussing some of Orlando's most historic and interesting sites. In particular, the history of Orlando that I'm going to share is kind of the history of this few block region around us and sort of how that grew and developed, because that's where a lot of what we are looking at today is actually located. Not all of it, but a good amount of it. So let's dive in and take it back to the 1840s. Around the time Florida became a state in 1845, American troops entered the third decade of a concerted effort to remove the Seminole tribe of Florida from the peninsula. Pushing Central Florida's native population past Lake Okeechobee involved establishing defense forts throughout the state. So many of the cities in our region actually began as military installations during the Seminole Wars, as communities sprang up around them. So Ocala was once Fort King, Tampa was Fort Brooke, and south of what is now Orlando stood Fort Gatlin. With these forts came settlements in nearby areas. The area that is now downtown actually belonged to settler Aaron Jernigan, who was the first American citizen to settle in what is now Orlando. Jernigan served as the region's first postmaster. He ranched cattle through what is now downtown and served as Orange County's first representative in the state legislature. The growing settlement between his home and Fort Gatlin even bore his name, Jernigan, before it was Orlando. In 1854, a man named William Lovell arrived from Mellonville, which is modern-day Sanford, so named for Fort Mellon on the shores of Lake Monroe. He established a sawmill on Lake Eola and included a corral for 300 cattle on the site that is now the Orlando Public Library, where the public library currently stands. Within the year, the area had a trading post established by John Worthington, who constructed the first log cabin in what is now the downtown business district. In 1857, he expanded his operation, replacing the cabin with Orlando's first frame house. In September of 1857, the area got its first post office, marking its first official recognition as an established settlement. Now, Orlando didn't exactly boom right away, but it did continue to grow modestly. A decade later, the area that is now downtown boasted barely 2 houses, 2 stores, a bar, a courthouse, and a hotel. By the time Orlando was incorporated in 1875, the population was 85 people. In the mid-1870s, Orlando saw competition for the title of county seat from Henry Sanford, who thought his eponymous settlement on the headwaters of the St. Johns should serve as the county seat. Fortunately for those who wanted to keep Orlando as the county seat, the state's wealthiest citizen, Jacob Summerlin, just happened to live here. Summerlin's cattle interests stretched all the way from Lake Eola down to Fort Myers, and he didn't want to have to travel all the way to Sanford for court business. So he offered $10,000 for a courthouse on the site of what is now Heritage Square, right out in front of our museum. And in securing the title seat for Orlando, Summerlin secured the small town's future. So this area right here in and around the History Center and Heritage Square and the library, Lake Eola, this whole kind of area, is really what most would consider the heart of downtown, and I think that makes a lot of sense. When you look back at the city's history, it was really this area that was some of the earliest settlement and the earliest development in Orlando. So this photo up here was actually taken, we don't know exactly, between 1875 and 1879. I believe it is the oldest known photograph of the city, and it shows the intersection of Orange Avenue and Pine Street. So it really kind of demonstrates just how rural, how wild this area still was in those early days. Between 1877 and 1894, Florida began to transform rapidly as the railroad, hotels, and resorts came ever further south into Florida. The state was marketed as a tourist destination for wealthy northerners, offering a healthful respite from the cold winters up north and luxurious accommodations, ample opportunities for relaxation and recreation. So soon, with some of those wealthy visitors, some business-minded folks began to see that the climate and abundance of unsettled land also made Florida ripe for a variety of business opportunities as well. By 1880, the railroad had reached Orlando, and the town had grown to 200 citizens. The 1880s also saw our region's first real estate boom, with land speculators heralding the virtues of owning Florida land across the globe. This period saw dozens of young upper-class Englishmen purchase land in the area, hoping to succeed in the citrus industry, which at the time was seen as a sure bet, particularly for the younger sons of English aristocrats who had little in the way of inheritance otherwise. And from this, we have the construction of our first site to be discussed today, which is up on the screen. The Rogers Keene building was built in 1886 by Englishman Gordon Rogers. At 137 years old, it is the oldest commercially operational building in Orlando. Rogers was one of a group of Englishmen who settled in the southeast of Orlando proper, which was referred to as the English colony. It was in the area that is today Conway, Belle Isle, and Narcoossee. The rugged community of dirt and sand roads where civic codes required tree stumps in the roadway be no taller than 1 foot was certainly a far cry from what these English gentlemen were used to. But they endeavored to bring a mark of home into their lives in the Florida wilds by creating a polo ground near what is now the intersection of Conway and Curry Ford, and holding boat races in Lake Conway. And to serve as a replacement for the refinement of a London gentleman's club, the Rogers Building, or the Cosmopolitan Club, as it was known then, served as a clubhouse offering drinks and dancing, and according to rumor, the only full-size billiards table south of St. Augustine. This is the building, I'm sure many of you that are familiar with downtown know this. It is on the corner of Magnolia and Pine. When the freeze of 1894-95 burst Florida's agricultural bubble, scores of the young men of the English colony fled for other ventures across the pond. And in 1910, Rogers outfitted the building with its now distinctive zinc siding imported from England before selling it and closing the club. This is what it looks like today, of course. In the intervening years, the Rogers Building has seen Orlando's skyline change dramatically, and its purpose has changed throughout the years as well. At various points in the 20th century, the building hosted restaurants, dance studios, union offices, a beauty shop, and a spiritualist church. After a final restaurant closed in 1983, the building stood vacant until the turn of the 21st century, when the gallery at Avalon opened there. Today, the building, which was named an Orlando Historic Landmark in 1978 and listed on the National Register of Historic Places in 1983, is home to City Arts, which is Downtown Arts District's flagship venue. So today the building hosts 7 art galleries, an in-house cafe, and presentation and event spaces. So it's a fitting venture for a building that was established to bring a bit of refined culture to the wilds of Orlando and has its self-created interest at Magnolia and Pine for over a century. Our next site is actually it's pretty unassuming in comparison to some of the other buildings we'll discuss today, but it certainly has an interesting history and historical significance. It is the one located on the southeast corner of Central and Magnolia, so right outside of our building here, which is currently the home to Stagger Inn. If you parked in the library garage for your visit today, you probably walked right past it, maybe didn't even notice it. But it has a pretty interesting backstory. Despite the lack of distinctive architecture like its neighbor, the Rogers Keene building, which is just down the block from it. It's another of the oldest buildings downtown, having graced our streets for well over a century. It was built by Dr. John McEwen, who originally moved to Orlando in 1906 to work with Dr. R.L. Harris, the founder of a tuberculosis sanitarium on the shores of Lake Estelle, which was the beginning of what would later become Florida Hospital. Within just 5 short years, Dr. McEwen had established his own practice in the heart of downtown. Opening in 1911, McEwen's 3-story hospital boasted 20 rooms. You can see from this picture, first you can see kind of behind the Confederate monument there, the Rogers Keene building behind it, and then also the Confederate monument that was moved to Lake Eola and then moved to Greenwood Cemetery used to be right down here in what is now Heritage Square Park. Notably, in 1912, Dr. McEwen and his hospital garnered international recognition as when he performed a delicate operation to remove a portion of a man's cancerous windpipe. Now, this certainly was not the only hospital in town. There were several different iterations of hospitals and several different practitioners in town. In fact, Dr. McEwen had a fierce competitor in the form of Dr. C.D. Christ. I'm not positive Christ or Christ, but it's spelt like Christ, who also came to work for Dr. Harris's Lake Estelle Sanitarium and founded his own private sanitarium just 1 year earlier than McEwen's in 1910, just a few blocks north on Magnolia and Robinson. Together, the two helped form the Orange County Medical Society in 1908, which established standardized pricing for medical procedures and other improvements to healthcare here locally. They were also instrumental in the establishment of Orange General Hospital, which opened in 1918 and was the beginning of what would become Orlando Regional Medical Center and Orlando Health. Along with others, such as J.B. Callahan, the area's only African-American doctor at the time, the two helped raise funds for the new modern facility and donated much-needed equipment, which was really hard to come by in the time due to World War I had just ended, and so it was difficult to come by some of the equipment that they needed. So following his time serving in World War I, McEwen returned to Orlando to run his clinic and act as a leader in Orlando's medical community until his retirement in 1942. All right. Moving forward just a few years, we're going to look at 3 buildings that were designed by the gentleman you see on the screen here, an architect whose work left a big mark on Orlando, Murray Schaefer King. I can say with certainty that everyone joining us in person today has seen his work, as you're currently inside one of the buildings that he designed. So you've definitely seen his mark on town. The 2 others still exist here downtown, along with several residences in the Lake Lucerne area. So Murray King was born in 1870 in Murraysville, Pennsylvania, the son of a wagon maker. King practiced carpentry and studied to become an architect while serving as a construction superintendent. Encouraged by a friend who had made the move, as many people were at this time, down south to Florida, King relocated his family to Orlando in 1904 and opened a cabinet shop at 18 East Pine Street. In 1912, King designated his first known structure, the Westcott Beardo House at 214 South Lucerne Circle. King began designing homes for prominent area citizens and many large commercial public buildings that are still local landmarks today. King blended known styles to create his own, which included elements from Prairie style, Mediterranean revival, neoclassical revival, among others. Among King's accomplishments are having been a charter member and director of the Florida Association of Architects and an appointee to the Florida State Board of Architecture, serving as its president for 6 years. King was also the first registered architect in the state. The 1910s and early 20s were a booming time of real estate growth in Orlando. King flourished alongside many of his well-known local contemporaries, including Ida Anna Ryan, Frank Bodine, George Krug, and Frederick Trimble. This collective of architects created a deliberate style that suited Central Florida, utilizing native motifs in designs and harmonizing with the area's climatic conditions. 3 of King's designs are still standing and serving our community in the heart of downtown, within just a few blocks of us. First, built in 1813, this is the Yowell Duckworth Department Store building, which was later home to Ivy's Department Store. It is on Central and Orange. This 4-story structure was commissioned by Newton Pendleton Yowell and Eugene Duckworth for $61,000. It boasted the city's first elevator, and in its early years, a rooftop garden restaurant and a movie theater. A 5th store was added in 1921. It was purchased by the J.B. Ivy Company in 1944 and sold in 1948 to Prudential Insurance for $950,000. The store closed in 1967. Now repurposed, the structure sold for $15.5 million in 2017 to a digital marketing firm. It looks much the same today as it did then, although it did not have a Taco Bell on the first floor when it was original, of course. All right, and then the second building that remains of Murray Schaefer Kings is located on the northeast corner of Wall Street and Orange Avenue. In 1923, the Angebilt Hotel was once the tallest building downtown. It was also once considered the only fireproof building in the city. The building was commissioned by Joseph F. Ange, and the hotel stood at 11 stories high and boasted 250 rooms. It was modeled after the Pennsylvania Hotel in New York City. Construction began in 1921. 2 years and $1.1 million later, the hotel had its grand opening on March 14, 1923. Catering to both vacationers and businessmen, the luxury hotel offered a wide variety of amenities, such as several dining rooms, a barber shop, meeting rooms, a solarium, a sky room, and more. It also had a rooftop sky deck, which you can see in this picture, that offered an unobstructed view of downtown and Lake Eola. And I don't know exactly what year this picture was taken. I would guess the 40s based on the cars, but you can see our building right behind it there. So it's our neighbor right next door. Where was I at? Okay, so the convenient location and the quality hospitality drew visitors to the luxurious hotel. It was considered the place to be in Orlando and hosted many grand events during its early life. Many local social clubs chose the hotel as their regular meeting place, and famous Orlando visitors that made sure to book a room included Henry Ford, Harvey Firestone, and Thomas Edison. Despite all its grandeur, the Angebilt was plagued with financial problems from the beginning. Just 2 months after opening it, Ange abruptly left the hotel and sold his interest. A month later, the owners filed for bankruptcy. The hotel managed to survive through several sales and even the Great Depression. However, it never managed to live up to the promise it had on opening day. Several disasters struck the hotel and brought about its demise. In 1944, a hurricane destroyed the rooftop deck, and in 1983, a fire broke out in the hotel's ballroom, damaging the top 2 floors. At the time, the ballroom was only being used for storage, making the fire even more destructive and causing the roughly 300 occupants of the hotel, who were mostly weekly renters and transients, to be displaced. The fire ushered in the end of an era for the Angebilt, as it would not reopen its doors as a hotel ever again. However, unlike the neighboring San Juan Hotel, the Angebilt managed to escape demolition due to the creation of the Downtown Orlando Historic District. With the help of the Orlando City Council and Orlando Historic Preservation Board, funds were contributed to assist a developer to buy and restore the old building and convert it into office space. Banks, restaurants, radio stations, and other businesses have all called the Angebilt home. It was even temporarily used as the Orange County Courthouse. Although no longer the iconic Orlando Hotel, the building has managed to adapt and remain standing as a reminder of Orlando's past. All right, and then of course we have our personal favorite of Murray King's designs, the 1927 Beaux Arts style courthouse, which has been the History Center's home since we opened in September 2000. This site was home to Orlando's courthouses for, this site has been the home to Orlando's courthouses for over a century, starting back with Jacob Summerlin's donation mentioned earlier in the 1870s. In 1892, the red brick courthouse, which is what you see up here on the screen, opened, which was in operation until our current building opened in 1927. The red brick courthouse was demolished in 1957, but you can see one of the faces from its 80-foot tall clock tower on display on the third floor of our museum. The original bell from the clock tower is on display in the lobby of the Orange County Courthouse building on Orange Avenue. Construction for the building we're currently in began in 1926. Murray King passed away during building's construction, but the project was taken over by his son James, who oversaw the building's completion. When the building was dedicated on October 12, 1927, it was witnessed by over 700 visitors and an elaborate ceremony including orchestral music, a ceremonial flag raising, and tours offered to the public. 2 main courtrooms were on the third floor, one of which is preserved and can still be visited today. The 5th floor housed the county jail. To accommodate the needs of the growing city in the mid-20th century, the red brick courthouse, construction on an annex in the space that once held the red brick courthouse began in 1959, and the addition opened in March of 1960, and you can of course see our building. It's kind of dwarfed by the annex, but it is still there. There were certainly some fascinating historical events that have taken place here, including a courthouse shooting in 1984, which resulted in the death of bailiff Arnie Wilkerson. The first trial that successfully used DNA as evidence, leading to a conviction in 1987, took place here. And of course, Ted Bundy's 1980 trial for the murder of Kimberly Leach also took place in that annex. Just allow me to take this opportunity to dispel the myth that Ted Bundy was tried in this building that we're currently standing in. He was actually tried in the annex, and we have no evidence that he actually ever even stepped foot in this building. So we get that a lot, as you can imagine. In 1995, Orange County debuted its current high-rise courthouse, and a task force of community leaders unanimously recommended that the 1927 courthouse become a larger regional history museum. We were formerly operating out of a smaller museum in Lock Haven Park. Starting in 1998, the majority of the inside was completely overhauled to create our exhibition galleries, offices, archival storage, and our research library. The third floor grand jury room and judges and clerks' offices, while certainly renovated, have retained a fairly similar layout to what they were when the court was in operation. These spaces are currently the offices and activity spaces for our education department. And in case anyone's interested to know, according to the blueprint that is on display in the third floor lobby, I believe that my current office used to be a prisoner holding cell, so some may say it still is, I don't know. In September, since 2000, this building has been our History Center home. I'll spare you a listing of all of our numerous accomplishments and things that make us wonderful, mainly because we're going to host a Lunch and Learn next year where we're going to talk about some of that stuff. So I'll save it for then. All right, so we are going to just travel now just a few blocks and less than a mile away to the Wells-Built Museum of African American History and Culture, which, like our museum, is housed in a historically significant building. Located in Paramore, which of course was a historically black neighborhood in the age of Jim Crow segregation, the Wells-Built Hotel hosted some of the most famous names in entertainment, starting in 1926 when it opened. The hotel was conveniently located right next door to the South Street Casino, which was a staple of the black community in Orlando. Both the hotel and the South Street Casino were owned and operated by Dr. William Monroe Wells, one of Orlando's first black physicians. The importance of Dr. Wells' contributions are significant, as he provided shelter, entertainment, and medical services to Orlando's African American community. Dr. Wells Casino does not actually refer to a place for gambling, but a place where social events could be held. The South Street Casino was more of a community center. It hosted events such as neighborhood dances, meetings, weddings, birthdays, and even boxing matches. As time went on, it became a popular stop for up-and-coming black musicians touring the music circuit in Central Florida. That is where the Angebilt Hotel came in, as it provided lodging for many of the talented black performers who were not permitted to stay at the city's other hotels due to segregation. Despite their great talent, many venues did not allow black artists to perform at the same venues as white artists at the time. This led to the creation of what is now commonly referred to as the Chitlin Circuit. This network of black-owned venues, mostly in the South, is where black musicians performed. Some of the famous guests who visited the Angebilt and stayed at the Angebilt include Ella Fitzgerald, Count Basie, Ray Charles, B.B. King, Louis Armstrong, just to name a few. The building was added to the U.S. National Register of Historic Places on September 4th, 2000. It reopened as a museum in June of 2009, which houses memorabilia from Orlando's African American community and contains displays on the civil rights movement in Orlando. All right, I imagine most of you recognize this building. It stands out certainly in the architecture of Orlando. It's a brutalist structure, and like other brutalist structures that still exist in America, they do stand out because much of brutalist architecture didn't stand the test of time in terms of aesthetics of what people like to see in a building, and so much of it has been demolished. But so it's actually really cool that our library still stands today because it's kind of unique in that way. Of course, this is our neighbor, the Orlando Public Library. The building that we're familiar with today was originally built in 1966, but the library's roots go back over 100 years to the Albertson Public Library, which opened November 8th, 1923. The first permanent library, which sat on the same site as the current Orlando Public Library, was named in honor of this gentleman, Captain Charles Albertson, who in 1921 offered to donate his large genealogical and book collection to the city if the city agreed to create a building for the purposes of having a lending library, which the city agreed to, and the Albertson Public Library opened in 1923. By the time the library was celebrating its 25th anniversary, Orlando had grown substantially, creating community need that outpaced the current library's space and resources. So in 1962, voters approved funding to construct a new library. The architect selected to design the new building was John Johansson, a member of the Harvard Five, who were an enclave of architects trained in the Bauhaus style, who began their careers building houses in New Canaan, Connecticut in the 1940s. The Bauhaus design style that is characterized by being abstract, angular, and geometric and unembellished. While Johansson's early designs, like this house here, are very simple and characteristic of the Bauhaus style, he began to embrace the brutalist architectural style that emerged in the 1950s, which emphasized function over form. And this is what we see in the Orlando Public Library. It's clear that the planners of the library project felt the impact of Orlando's rapid growth and anticipated that it would continue. When Johansson was selected to design the new library building, he was tasked with creating a structure that had the potential to expand up to 3 times its original size to accommodate future growth. So for frame of reference, what you're looking at here, the library entrance used to be on Rosalind Avenue, and so this is the front of the building along Rosalind. So the criteria that the building be able to grow with the community informed his design, which he called a, quote, composition of monolithic concrete, end quote, and described it as, quote, an accreation of forms. As colonies of shelled animals assemble or grow together, it suggests the continuing process of growth, a most valid concept and expression, since expansion is an important part of the program, end quote. Having adopted the new name of Orlando Public Library in 1965, the new building was dedicated on August 7th, 1966, and is exemplary of brutalist design with its large textured concrete facade, dramatic geometric lines, and exposed concrete inside. The heavy exterior that emphasizes the structural materials rather than embellishments. As anticipated, Orlando did continue to grow drastically, and in 1981, the city purchased the remaining property on its block. The properties west of the building, west of the existing building, up to Magnolia, included residential properties, the Chamber of Commerce, and the Salvation Army. They purchased those properties in order to expand the building, and these pictures show just how much the building expanded, the original size of it, and then it now covers that whole block, of course. So expansion construction began in 1982, and the new expansion opened April 6th of 1986. The pictures on the slide give a good perspective of the size, I just said that, of the original 1966 building. The expansion was designed by Schweizer Associates, who also designed the Mexico Pavilion at Epcot. And it added 3 floors and nearly 230,000 square feet to the library building. Looking at the building as it currently exists, it's pretty evident that the original design by Johansson was designed to expand and meant to be built upon, because if you look at today's building, it's hard to see, you would have to know that the original building existed to understand that it was an original building and an expansion. So it's very seamless. If anyone's interested, the library is going to be doing on November 8th a total history, because it's their 100th anniversary on November 8th this year, a total history of the entire history of their building. So if anyone's interested. All right. So moving on from architecture, I think the next 2 items I've selected to talk about both truly live up to the name of today's program. These are these really do kind of should be considered icons of Orlando. They're recognizable to pretty much anybody who spends time downtown. At least in my mind, they're iconic. So the first that we're going to talk about is the Linton E. Allen Memorial Fountain, which is quite literally the symbol of Orlando. So the symbol of the city of Orlando, I should say, which it has been since 1980. Its current iteration, which is on the left side of the screen, was the result of a 2017 contest to redesign the city flag. The winning submission, created by graphic designer and UCF alum Tim Eggert, depicts the fountain at Lake Eola Park with water streaming into the sky. According to Orlando, the water, quote, represents the continuous flow of energy and innovation that makes Orlando a city on the rise. The other image up here is a picture of the flag in an earlier iteration of the city's emblem, and you can see the fountain is still like the centerpiece of that. So it has been since 1980. So let's take a look back at how it became one of Orlando's most beloved and recognizable monuments. The Lake Eola Fountain would not exist without the man from whom it bears its name, Linton E. Allen. Founder of the First National Bank of Orlando, Allen was an influential member of the community, playing key roles in bringing the Glenn L. Martin Company, now Lockheed Martin, to Central Florida, and building the campus of the First Presbyterian Church. A veteran of both world wars, Allen admired the fountains he saw in European cities during his post-war travels. So that sparked the idea in him for a fountain to increase Orlando's prominence. In 1956, the Orlando Utilities Commission approved Allen's request to build an illuminated water spouting fountain at Lake Eola, which has been the focal point of life in Orlando since the pioneers first settled here. Not the fountain, Lake Eola, I mean. Landscape architect William C. Pauley of Atlanta designed a fountain with a plastic and concrete dome, 60 feet in diameter. However, construction crews quickly realized that the middle of the lake was too deep because it was positioned directly over a sinkhole. Even at the shallower alternative site that he chose, it required 28 60-foot long steel cylinders filled with concrete driven into the lake bed. 320 tons of concrete were barged in to build the foundation, and a pontoon barge was brought in from New Orleans to support the construction crane. In addition, 3 miles of wiring were needed to control the fountain's 18-minute lighting sequence. With power output of 60,500 watts, the fountain blasted 6,400 gallons of water in the air per minute. Dedicated on October 5th, 1957, the 100th anniversary of Orlando as the county seat, the fountain was named Centennial Fountain originally. A parade and fireworks drew a crowd of 175,000 people who gasped, newspapers reported, when the fountain was turned on for the first time at 8 p.m., lighting up and shooting water 75 feet into the air. The fountain soon became one of the most distinctive symbols of Orlando. After its founder died in 1965, the fountain was renamed the Linton E. Allen Memorial Fountain in his honor. After it was struck by lightning in 2009, the fountain underwent a $1.6 million renovation. Fountain and swan-shaped souvenirs made from the replaced fountain shell were sold to the public, generating thousands of dollars for reinvestment in Lake Eola Park. And the renovated fountain was rededicated on July 4th of 2021. Okay, our next quote site, if you will, our next icon. It may have competition from the 72-foot tall tree at Lake Eola, but perhaps Orlando's most iconic holiday decoration is the yellow Christmas star that illuminates the intersection of Orange Avenue and Central Boulevard each year. Downtown was once a bustling retail scene, attracting customers from all over Central Florida. Two of Orlando's most prominent department stores, Dixon and Ives and Ivy's, dominated the corners of the intersection at Orange Avenue and Central Boulevard. In December of 1955, the stores set aside their rivalry and joined forces in the name of the holiday spirit to brighten the street. Dixon and Ives owner Wilson Reed teamed up with Ivy's to suspend a giant yellow 7-foot star between the two buildings. Over 600 lights surrounded the steel frame, which the Orlando Sentinel described the following year as, quote, the most impressive holiday decoration in Central Florida, end quote. The imaginative citizens referred to the star as the Christmas spider because of the web-like strands that extended out from the star to suspend it between the two buildings. But as the era of shopping malls began to rise in the 1960s and 1970s, the downtown retail district became less popular, and it is unclear how long the Christmas star was grounded during this period of decline. The star would have fallen into oblivion if it weren't for the efforts of Jack Kazantzis, who wrote the Orlando Sentinel in 1982, expressing interest in bringing the decoration back to life. Kazantzis led a group of downtown merchants advocating for the creation of a new and improved star to take the place where the 1954 version once hung. Designed by Bob Galler, the much larger star went through a series of tests to ensure that all 600 pounds of its glowing grandeur could safely hang between the two buildings. The new star made its debut in December of 1984 at an impressive 10 feet wide and 10 feet tall. Kazantzis helped ensure the holiday tradition was kept alive when it appeared that the star was again heading towards retirement in 1998. He convinced Mayor Glenda Hood to save the star after city officials decided that it was too worn down to display. He even raised money to have the star refurbished after the holiday season. The decoration received another restoration in 2005 when Cindy White designed a new light display to surround the yellow plexiglass star. In 2010, the star was rewired and strung with 4,000 LED lights. However, its number one fan was not there to see the ornament ascend to its familiar spot. Jack Kazantzis had passed away in August of that year. Shortly after, the city issued a proclamation naming the holiday icon the Jack Kazantzis Christmas Star. The spirit of Kazantzis lives on as the star illuminates Orange Avenue each year, serving as a reminder that the actions of one dedicated individual can brighten the lives of many others. All right, I want to conclude today's program by highlighting two more sites that perhaps people have never noticed, but that are definitely worth noticing because of the story behind them. So first, has anybody noticed this little tiny birdhouse on Bumpy and kind of wondered why it's there and what it is? You're about to learn today. So I drive that way to work every day, and I'm always like, why is that birdhouse up there? And then I learned it. So, so this is on the corner of Bumpy and Robinson. It has been there for over 70 years, but I imagine few residents know the heartwarming story of why it is there or where it came from. In 2015, we were happy to have Jim Hickman, who is the son of W. Aubrey Hickman, the man first responsible for the first birdhouse up there, share the story with us. So Aubrey Hickman worked for the city of Orlando for most of his life. He began building curbs, many of which still exist today, for the city as a young man in his early 1920s. Eventually, he worked in the city's engineering department and was highly respected by city officials, including Mayor William Billy Beardle, who led the city from 1941 to 1952. One of Hickman's many city duties was maintaining the traffic signals, which included clearing out birds' nests. And sometimes Jim, his son, who told us the story, was allowed to ride along with him, with his dad and his coworker, who Jim called Uncle Jesse. Jim wasn't with him the day that they stopped at Robinson and Bumby, we think around 1945, but he always imagined his dad looking up at the nest up there that he had to clear out and saying to Jesse, "I'm going to build them a better home." Aubrey took it upon himself to build a birdhouse in the city's workshop. It was a simple home fashioned from pine. Once complete, Aubrey asked the city's sign painter, whom Jim recalled was called Sparky, to make it official. With paint from the Bumby Hardware Company, Sparky painted Orlando on the roof. You can see it faintly, it's kind of hard to see. And Better Homes on the side. And soon, the very first birdhouse appeared at the intersection. In 1952, the city removed the weather-worn birdhouse and presented it to Hickman's daughter, Patsy. Jim remembered seeing a newspaper photo of the presentation while he was overseas in the U.S. Navy during the Korean War. Sadly, his father was unable to be present at the ceremony due to illness. Hickman had been diagnosed with cancer, and he passed away in 1953. The city of Orlando has kept a birdhouse on the traffic signal at Robinson and Bumby since the removal of the original in 1952, replacing it whenever the previous one is damaged or worn out. The current birdhouse was built by signal technician Scott Fulkerson and installed in 2009. Meanwhile, the original birdhouse, the one you see here, is enjoying retirement in the History Center's collection thanks to a donation from Jim Hickman. All right, and then finally, this is our last site that we're going to talk about today. Those of you who've been in Orlando a while will recognize this building. It's not actually there anymore, but part of it does remain downtown. Part of it does still live on. It used to occupy the area where the Dr. Phillips Center for the Performing Arts is currently located. It was designed by architect Robert Murphy, and in 1963, the American Federal Building brought a touch of mid-century modern design to our growing city. The building, best known for its round shape and distinctive brise-soleil latticework, consisted of 120 cast concrete sections that served both form and function, creating visual interest as well as shade from the intense Florida sun. 10 years after its debut, the building expanded upward with the addition of this controversial 5-story glass tower. It was commonly disliked by residents, citizens of Orlando, due to its lack of cohesion to the original concrete levels. Despite this contentious addition, the round building, as it was often called, remained a fixture of the Orlando skyline, and the lower levels are often considered one of the best examples of mid-century design in Central Florida. Ownership of the building changed hands several times over the years, but the iconic structure continued to stand tall over downtown Orlando for nearly half a century. By the early 2000s, the building's primary function became overflow office space for City Hall soon after. The land upon which the round building sat was earmarked for the planned DPAC Center, and news of the building's upcoming demolition spread. The Nils M. Schweizer Fellows, NMSF, a nonprofit group of architects and architecture enthusiasts named in honor of architect and Frank Lloyd Wright protege Nils M. Schweizer, Orlando architect Nils M. Schweizer, began formulating a plan to preserve this piece of Central Florida history. Rather than campaigning to save the entire building, they would strive to save the unique concrete lattice exterior for an innovative reuse while still preserving a link to our architectural heritage. The Nils M. Schweizer Fellows launched an international contest in 2008 to search for a creative use for the geometric cast concrete sections. The contest was open to architects, students, artists, or anyone with a creative solution. While the contest attracted talented designers from around the world and received many imaginative, clever designs, it ultimately ran into budgetary concerns. The winning design by Jürgen Leimer and René Riesland of Nuremberg, Germany, was never realized. Despite this defeat, NMSF pushed forward to continue to raise funds for the next round. The next round project is what they're calling it, excuse me. In addition to private donations, the project also received a grant through the City of Orlando, matching all funds raised up to $70,000. In 2014, demolition day arrived, but thanks to the dedication of the NMSF and support of City Commissioner Patty Sheehan, 68 of the 120 total concrete panels were saved from the wrecking ball and moved into storage for eventual use, which is what brings us to the site that I'm going to mention as our last site. This unassuming piece of public art is actually out in front of our building in Heritage Square. If you haven't seen it before, I encourage you to stop by on your way out today. It's situated on the park's south side along Central Boulevard, which the City of Orlando installed in 2018 as the first reuse of the iconic panels from the original round building. NMSF's John Kaiser devised a steel structure to support the concrete panel with donated supplies and installation costs covered from John Grant of Atlantic Steel. The other 67 panels remain in storage, but it is hoped that they can be put to good use to commemorate Orlando's iconic round building. All right, so that is our talk for today. We do have some time. I can open up the floor for any questions if anyone has any. Do we have one from the chat?
Well, this is a question that I have today.
All right.
So, is the top of Lake Eola is attached to the bottom of the lake bed? And also, like, how deep is Lake Eola? Did you ever find out?
No, you've asked me two questions that I don't know the answer to. So for those on the web who probably didn't hear Cheyenne, she asked how deep Lake Eola is, and what was the other part of it?
If the fountain is attached to the lake bed, like how that is, or...
Yeah, I'm not sure. I'll have to look into that. I do not know how deep Lake Eola is. I know it's very deep because it was originally formed from a sinkhole, and those lakes do tend to be pretty deep, yeah. Yes?
Thanks for a very interesting presentation. For some of these buildings named in what we just say the History Center building, for the materials inside, what happened to those things? So using this building as an example, was the History Center able to acquire some of those materials, like chambers or store records or the gavel, whatever?
So for those who didn't hear, who are online and didn't hear, she's asking when the building was renovated and repurposed to become the History Center, what happened to the materials inside. I will say our courtroom that is currently preserved on the 3rd floor is actually pieces of that were taken from other rooms, other courtrooms that existed, particularly because in 1998 or 1999, when they were doing the renovation, there was a fire that burnt down part of the original courtroom. And so pieces from other rooms were brought in and repurposed for the renovation of that courtroom space. In terms of like other materials from the original courthouse, so this building itself had kind of fallen into disuse in terms of like actual like holding court proceedings, because they had the modern annex. Now, when the annex was torn down, I'm not sure what happened to all those materials. I do know they did save some things. For instance, if you look at the signs outside that say Orange County Regional History Center, these like little like kind of squares with little bean shapes in them that are colored, those came from the original annex. And so things were incorporated in some way. And I'm not an expert on what's in our collection. I work for our education department, not our collections department. But I imagine that there are probably some items from the original courthouse in our collection, certainly archival documents and things. Rick, I don't know, do you happen to know by any chance, have any insight as to that? Yeah, so Rick, for the online audience, Rick shared that our collection does hold the cornerstone of the original red brick courthouse from 1892. But yeah, if you want to, if you're curious and you are interested in doing research on the original courthouse, our collections team is always available. They take research requests. So that's a great avenue to go to. Yes.
So, 2 things. First, it appears that Google says Lake Eola is 80 feet deep.
Okay, good to know.
And the other thing is, I believe Angebilt has a tunnel underground that goes maybe across the street to the Beecham. Do you know anything about that?
I do not know about that. Intriguing.
Yeah.
Yes, it does? Okay.
I think they used it, like, I think they may have used it between the hotel and the performing space for...
Oh, yeah.
I'm not entirely sure about that.
Fascinating. So for our guests online, our audience member commented that Google says that Lake Eola is 80 feet deep, and also that there is rumor, I guess, to be confirmed, I should say, that there's a tunnel that goes from the Angebilt under the street to the Beecham that could have potentially been used to shuttle, ferry, transport acts from the hotel where they were staying to the Beecham to perform. Interesting. I'll have to look into that. That's very interesting. All right. Any other questions? Okay. Well, perfect. Thank you all for joining us today. I hope you enjoyed today's program. Supporting our programming is one of the best ways you can support the History Center. So we appreciate you being here today. If you want to learn more about how you can support us and get involved, our website is up there on the screen. Visit us at thehistorycenter.org. You can find our upcoming events, information about volunteering, information about membership, etc. Yes.